I'm Eleanor Whitmore, 81, and for 3 years, I've been the charity case at Sunset Manor. The staff whispered about my worn clothes, my simple meals, how I counted every penny. They treated me like a burden, rolling their eyes when I asked for help, speaking to me like I was invisible, making me feel like the poorest resident in their pristine facility. What they didn't know was that I'd been watching, listening, taking notes. Every slight, every cruel comment, every moment they treated me as less than human because they thought I couldn't afford better. The administrator, Patricia, was the worst, always reminding me how fortunate I was to receive their generous sliding scale pricing. But yesterday, something changed. My lawyer finally called with news I'd been waiting for. In exactly 24 hours, these people who've spent years treating me like garbage would discover the truth about who really owned every brick, every room, every dismissive word they'd spoken. The reckoning was about to begin. Every morning at Sunset Manor began the same way for me, with a reminder of my place in their carefully constructed hierarchy. I'd wake to the sound of cheerful voices in the hallway, but they weren't meant for me. Those bright "good morning, Mrs. Henderson" greetings were reserved for residents whose families paid full price. When Jennifer finally reached my room, her tone shifted to barely concealed irritation. "Come on, Eleanor, let's get you moving. We don't have all day." She'd help me dress with rough efficiency. Never mind that my arthritis made quick movements painful. The nicer residents got gentle assistance and patient conversation. I got functional care delivered with sighs and eye rolls. Patricia Morrison, our administrator, perfected the art of condescension disguised as charity. She'd sweep into the dining room during breakfast, all smiles and professional warmth, greeting the paying residents by name. When she reached my table, always in the back corner, away from the windows, her voice would drop to that special tone reserved for burdens. "Eleanor, dear, how are we doing today? I hope you're remembering to appreciate how fortunate you are to be here with us." The word fortunate always came with a slight emphasis, a reminder that I should be grateful for their generosity. Other residents paid $8,000 monthly. My sliding scale fee was supposedly adjusted for my income, but Patricia never let me forget the difference. The staff schedule hung behind the nurse's station, and I'd learned to read it upside down during my slow walks past their desk. Next to my name, someone had written "difficult" and "needs extra patience," code words for a resident who couldn't advocate effectively for herself. Mrs. Henderson, whose family visited weekly and sent expensive gifts, was marked as sweet and low maintenance. Meal times revealed the clearest distinctions. The full-paying residents received their food first, served on proper plates, with attention to presentation. By the time my meal arrived, it was lukewarm and carelessly plated. When I once asked if I could have my soup heated up, Jennifer actually rolled her eyes. "Eleanor, you get what you get. We're not running a restaurant here." The activities director, Sarah, would announce the day's events with enthusiasm for everyone else, then turn to me with barely disguised obligation. "Eleanor, you're welcome to join us if you'd like, but I know these activities can be challenging on a limited budget." She meant the $5 craft fees or the trips to the local theater. That required personal spending money. But I watched. I took notes. In my dresser drawer, beneath my few threadbare sweaters, I kept a small notebook where I documented every slight, every moment of differential treatment, every policy violation I witnessed, the timestamp when Mrs. Chen pressed her call button, but waited 20 minutes for help because she was also on sliding scale. The way they spoke about residents' finances within earshot, the shortcuts taken with care for those who couldn't complain effectively. What they didn't realize was that their charity case had spent decades running businesses, managing people, and understanding exactly what quality care looked like. I knew They were failing not just me, but every vulnerable person in their custody. Soon, they would learn the cost of their cruelty. I wasn't always the forgotten woman. In room 247, on my nightstand sits a faded photograph, Robert and me on our wedding day in 1962. Both of us young and impossibly hopeful. I was 23, he was 25, and we believed we could conquer the world together. Looking at that picture now, I can barely recognize the confident young woman in the simple white dress, her eyes bright with ambition. Robert saw something in me that others missed. While my family expected me to be content with marriage and children, he encouraged my ideas, my questions about business and money. Eleanor, he'd say, you have a mind for numbers and people. Don't waste that gift. We started with nothing, a tiny apartment above a bakery, and dreams bigger than our bank account. Robert worked construction during the day, while I kept books for small businesses around town. Every evening, we'd sit at our kitchen table covered with papers, planning our future. We saved every penny, lived on beans and rice, and talked endlessly about opportunities we saw others missing. The 1960s were changing everything, and we noticed trends others overlooked. People were living longer, families were spreading out geographically, and the old model of caring for aging parents at home was becoming impossible. There's going to be a need, I told Robert one night in 1965, pointing to census data I'd been studying. People are going to need places for their parents that feel like home, not hospitals. Robert trusted my instincts completely when I suggested we mortgage everything to buy our first small residential property to convert into senior housing. He didn't hesitate. If you see it, Eleanor, I believe it. That faith meant everything to a young woman in an era when banks wouldn't even talk to wives about business loans. Our first facility was a converted Victorian house with room for 8 residents. I insisted on details that seemed extravagant. To others, real wood furniture, home-cooked meals, fresh flowers in common areas. These are people's mothers and fathers. I'd tell our staff, how would you want your family treated? Robert handled the financial negotiations and regulatory requirements, but I ran the daily operations. I learned every resident's name, their histories, their fears and joys. Mrs. Patterson missed her garden, so I created raised beds outside her window. Mr. Williams felt lost without his workshop, so we converted a basement room where he could tinker with small projects. The residents flourished, and their families noticed. Word spread about the little nursing home, where people were treated like family, not patients. By 1970, we had a waiting list. That's when Robert and I realized we weren't just running a business, we were filling a crucial need with dignity and love. We're going to build something lasting, I told him, holding his hand as we walked through our second property acquisition. Neither of us imagined I'd one day experience the other side of senior care. Forgotten and dismissed in one of my own facilities. By 1975, Robert and I owned 3 nursing facilities. But I was already seeing the bigger picture. The demographic shift was accelerating. The children of the Great Depression were aging, and their baby boomer children would need senior care solutions within 2 decades. While other businesses focused on immediate profits, I was planning for a generational opportunity. We need to think beyond individual properties, I explained to Robert during one of our weekly strategy sessions. We need to create a system, a standard of care that families can trust no matter which facility they choose. He spread the regional map across our dining table, and I pointed to communities where development was pushing outward, where families were establishing roots far from aging parents. The key was location and timing. I spent months driving through small cities and suburbs, studying demographics, visiting existing facilities, and talking to local families, I discovered that most nursing homes were either medical institutions that felt sterile and unwelcoming, or small operations that couldn't afford quality staff and equipment. There was a middle ground waiting to be claimed. A breakthrough came in 1978 when I identified a troubled nursing home chain, 7 facilities in 3 states, poorly managed and financially distressed. The owners were eager to sell, and I saw potential they'd missed entirely. These aren't failed businesses, I told Robert. They're diamonds in the rough with the wrong management approach. I negotiated the purchase directly, spending weeks reviewing their books, talking to staff, and understanding why they were failing. The problems were systematic high staff turnover because of poor pay and working conditions, family dissatisfaction due to impersonal care, and cost-cutting measures that saved pennies while losing dollars in reputation and occupancy. My solution was counterintuitive for the time. Instead of cutting costs further, I invested heavily in staff training and wages. I required every employee to spend time with residents. Beyond their specific duties, aides learned residents' names and personal histories. Kitchen staff understood dietary preferences and restrictions. Maintenance workers became familiar faces who residents trusted in their rooms. People don't want to park their parents somewhere to wait for death, I explained to skeptical investors Robert brought to our presentations. They want to know their loved ones are valued, comfortable, and treated with dignity. Families will pay premium prices for that peace of mind. The renovations took 2 years and most of our savings, but the results proved my strategy. Occupancy rates climbed from 60% to 95% within 18 months. More importantly, we had virtually no staff turnover because employees felt proud of their work and were compensated fairly. By 1985, Whitmore Senior Living owned 15 facilities across 5 states. I had developed the operational systems, staff training programs, and quality standards that would become our trademark. Robert handled external relationships, banks, regulators, investors, while I perfected the internal culture that made residents feel at home. The original property deed from 1987, when we purchased our 16th facility, shows my name as primary investor and majority owner. Even then, I was building the foundation for something that would outlast both of us, a company committed to treating seniors with the respect and care they deserved in their most vulnerable years. The decision to remain in the background wasn't about modesty, it was strategy. In the 1980s and 1990s, business was still very much a man's world, and I learned early that Robert's presence in negotiations opened doors that remained firmly closed to women. Regardless of our expertise or ownership stakes, our corporate structure reflected this reality. While I held controlling interest through a complex network of holding companies and trusts, Robert served as the public face of Whitmore Senior Living. He attended industry conferences, gave interviews to trade publications, and represented U.S. in meetings with bankers and government officials. Behind the scenes, I made every operational decision that mattered. The arrangement worked because we trusted each other completely. Robert never made commitments without consulting me, and I never resented his public role because I understood its necessity. I'm the spokesperson, he'd joke, but Eleanor is the brain and heart of this operation. He meant it, and everyone who worked closely with us knew it was true. My invisibility gave me advantages that Robert couldn't have enjoyed. I could visit our facilities unannounced and observe genuine interactions between staff and residents. I could attend industry meetings where competitors spoke freely, assuming I was just someone's wife rather than their primary competition. I learned about regulatory changes, market shifts, and opportunities, while others saw me as decorative background The complex ownership structure I created served multiple purposes beyond gender dynamics. It protected our assets from litigation, minimized tax exposure, and allowed for flexible management of our growing portfolio. More importantly, it let me maintain control while appearing to be a silent partner in what looked like Robert's company. I insisted on policies that seemed radical at the time, but were simply common sense. Every facility manager had to spend one full day monthly working direct care, changing bed sheets, helping with meals, sitting with residents who had no visitors. You can't manage what you don't understand, I told them, and you can't understand senior care from an office. Our staff training programs were comprehensive because I demanded excellence. New employees spent their first week shadowing experienced workers, learning not just procedures, but the personal stories and preferences of residents. We paid above market wages because good people deserved fair compensation, and residents deserved consistent, caring staff. The philosophy extended to every detail. I personally approved the paint colors, furniture selections, and even the types of plants in common areas. Nothing was left to chance, because I understood that environment shaped experience. Would you want to live here? Was my standard for every decision. Robert supported every choice, even when investors questioned the costs. Eleanor sees things others miss. He'd tell board members who worried about profit margins, trust her judgment, it's never been wrong yet. He was right. Our occupancy rates and family satisfaction scores consistently outperformed industry averages. The irony wasn't lost on me that my own company's success allowed Patricia and her staff to treat me with such casual cruelty. They saw a poor old woman whose bills were paid by charity, never imagining that every dollar they received came from systems I had designed and policies I had written. The very paycheck Patricia collected each month was funded by my life's work. Robert's heart attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning in March, 5 years ago. He was reviewing quarterly reports at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd planned our first facility purchase decades earlier, when he simply slumped forward and was gone. The paramedics said he died instantly, probably feeling no pain, but that small comfort couldn't touch the devastation of losing my partner, my best friend, my anchor to the world. The funeral was enormous. Hundreds of people came, employees, residents' families, industry colleagues, community leaders. They spoke about Robert's vision, his leadership, his compassion for seniors. Every word was true, but incomplete. They were mourning the public face of our company, while I grieved the private man who had believed in my dreams before I fully believed in them myself. In the weeks following the service, I discovered how thoroughly Robert had protected me from the business world's expectations. Suddenly, lawyers, board members, and facility managers who had worked with us for years were treating me like a widow who needed guidance rather than the architect of everything they'd been implementing. Don't worry about the details, Mrs. Whitmore, they'd say. We'll handle the difficult decisions. The presumption should have angered me, but I felt too broken to fight. For 48 years, Robert and I had been a team. Every success, every challenge, every decision had been shared. Without him, I couldn't find my bearings. The business that had been our life's work together felt empty and meaningless when faced alone. I stopped visiting facilities regularly. The sight of couples holding hands in our common areas, of husbands visiting wives who no longer recognized them, of the daily evidence of love persisting through loss, it was too painful. I retreated to our house, to the garden Robert had planted for me, to the quiet spaces where his absence felt less overwhelming. My appearance began to reflect my internal state. The professional wardrobe I'd maintained for decades seemed pointless when I rarely left home. I stopped getting my hair styled weekly, stopped wearing makeup, stopped caring about the impression I made on others. Grief had stripped away everything except the essential me, and that woman felt tired, forgotten, and alone. The company continued operating successfully because the systems we'd built were solid, but I could feel myself becoming irrelevant to its daily function. Managers made decisions and informed me afterward. Financial reports arrived monthly whether I read them or not. The business world moved forward, while I remained frozen in the moment I lost the only person who truly understood my vision. 2 years after Robert's death, I realized I had become invisible not through strategic choice but through withdrawal. The woman who had once commanded boardrooms and transformed an industry was now just another elderly widow whose opinions were politely acknowledged and promptly ignored. The isolation was complete, and I had collaborated in creating it. That's when I began to understand what loneliness and powerlessness felt like for the first time in my adult life, and began to wonder how many of the residents in my facilities experience those same feelings every day. The idea came to me gradually, emerging from the fog of grief like a half-remembered dream. I was sitting in my garden on a September afternoon, watching leaves fall and thinking about Robert's favorite saying, "You can't manage what you don't understand." I had spent decades understanding senior care from the perspective of an owner and administrator, but I had never experienced it as a vulnerable resident. At 78, I was healthy enough to live independently, but old enough to authentically need the services my facilities provided. What if I could experience senior care from the inside, not as the owner making inspections, but as a resident depending on others for daily support? What would I learn about the gap between my policies and their implementation? The more I considered it, the more essential it seemed. Stories reached me occasionally about families dissatisfied with care at various facilities. Complaints that management assured me were isolated incidents or misunderstandings. But what if they weren't? What if the culture I had worked so hard to create had eroded without my direct oversight? My lawyer, David Chan, thought I had lost my mind when I explained my plan. "Eleanor, you want to falsify financial records to get admitted to your own nursing home as a charity case. The legal implications alone are manageable," I interrupted. "I'm not defrauding anyone. I'll pay every penny owed, just not through the normal channels. The facility will receive full compensation. The state will get accurate reports, and I'll gain invaluable insight into our operations." David's concerns were practical and ethical. Creating false documentation could expose both of us to legal consequences. More troubling, he argued, was the deception itself. These people trust you, your employees, your residents. They deserve honesty, not manipulation. But I wasn't planning to hurt anyone. The goal was to understand how vulnerable residents were actually treated when they couldn't advocate for themselves, when they depended entirely on the kindness and professionalism of staff. If the experience confirmed that our standards were being maintained, wonderful. If it revealed problems, I could address them from a position of complete understanding. The logistics required careful planning. I needed to create a financial profile that would qualify me for sliding scale assistance without technically lying, using post-Robert asset distributions that temporarily reduced my apparent income, emphasizing health care costs and home maintenance expenses that were legitimate, but not my primary financial picture. David reluctantly helped structure the documentation to be legally defensible, while creating the appearance of limited resources. Choosing Sunset Manor was strategic. It was one of our newer acquisitions, purchased 3 years earlier from a family that had run it for 2 generations before financial pressures forced the sale. The transition had been smooth, but I had less direct history with its culture and staff than with facilities I had built from the ground up. I spent weeks preparing mentally for the role I would play. Eleanor Whitmore, the powerful business owner, would disappear. In her place would be Eleanor, an elderly widow with modest resources and no family, advocates exactly the type of resident who depended entirely on staff compassion and institutional policies for quality of life. The transformation wasn't just financial paperwork. I stopped maintaining my appearance to professional standards, chose clothing that looked worn and inexpensive, and practiced the hesitant, apologetic manner of someone accustomed to being dismissed. The saddest part was how naturally it came. Grief had already begun that transformation. My hidden journal became my lifeline and my weapon. Every evening after dinner, I would sit by my small window and document the day's observations in careful, precise handwriting. What began as a fact-finding mission evolved into a comprehensive record of institutional failure that broke my heart and fueled my determination for justice. The patterns emerged within weeks. Staff treated residents differently based on perceived wealth and family involvement. Mrs. Henderson, whose daughter visited twice weekly and sent expensive flower arrangements, received prompt attention to every request. Her call button was answered within minutes. Her meals were served at the proper temperature, and staff members engaged her in genuine conversation about her interests and family. By contrast, Mr. Garcia, an elderly man whose family lived across the country and rarely visited, waited 20 minutes or more when he needed assistance. Staff spoke to him in simplified language, assuming cognitive impairment because he was poor and alone. When he asked for help adjusting his television or reaching items from his closet, the response was often delayed or dismissive. I documented specific incidents with timestamps and witness names. On October 15th at 2:30 p.m., Jennifer told Mrs. Chan that she couldn't help her to the bathroom because you just went an hour ago. You can wait. Mrs. Chan, too polite to argue, waited until her bladder couldn't hold any longer and had an accident that left her humiliated and crying. The incident report blamed Mrs. Chen's incontinence issues rather than acknowledging the denied assistance. The medication distribution revealed another troubling pattern. Residents with family advocates received their medications on schedule, with explanations about what they were taking and why. Those of us without regular visitors got pills thrust into our hands with minimal explanation and irritation if we asked questions. Just take them, Eleanor, became Jennifer's standard response when I inquired about changes to my prescriptions. Patricia's administrative policies created a culture of subtle discrimination that staff internalized and amplified. The difficult resident designation appeared frequently in files. For those of us on sliding scale fees, we were labeled difficult not for actual behavioral problems, but for asking questions, requesting help, or expressing preferences about our care. The classification became a self-fulfilling prophecy as staff approached us with preemptive irritation. The activities program showed the clearest economic segregation. Craft activities that required supply fees automatically excluded residents who couldn't afford the extra charges. Day trips to local attractions included transportation costs that many couldn't manage. Even movie nights occasionally featured films available only through premium cable channels, creating informal barriers to participation. I documented the maintenance issues that affected different rooms differently. The wealthy corridor rooms with private pay residents received prompt attention to broken fixtures, heating problems, and cosmetic issues. Our hallway, designated for sliding scale and Medicaid residents, had a leaky ceiling in the common area that went unrepaired for 6 months, a broken bathroom door that posed safety risks, and burned out light bulbs that left sections of the corridor dim and unwelcoming. The dining room seating arrangement wasn't officially segregated, but it might as well have been. Staff guided paying residents to tables near the windows with the best natural light and garden views. Those of us on financial assistance were directed to tables in the back corner, away from the windows, where conversations were harder to hear, and we felt invisible to visiting families and administrators. Most heartbreaking were the small cruelties that accumulated daily. The way staff spoke about us within earshot, assuming we couldn't hear or wouldn't understand. The charity cases are always the most demanding. I heard one aide tell another, while they thought I was napping, the casual dismissal of our concerns, the eye rolls when we needed assistance, the clear message that we should be grateful for basic care rather than expecting dignity. My documentation expanded beyond individual incidents to systemic problems, staffing patterns that left our corridor understaffed during evening hours, training deficiencies that left new employees unprepared to handle residents with respect, administrative policies that prioritized cost-cutting over care quality in areas where families weren't likely to notice or complain. After 3 years, my journal contained over 200 pages of detailed observations, incident reports, and policy violations. Every page represented a betrayal of the values Robert and I had built our company upon, and every entry strengthened my resolve to transform not just Sunset Manor, but every facility in our chain. Patricia Morrison embodied everything wrong with modern nursing home administration, the reduction of human beings to profit margins, the casual cruelty disguised as business efficiency, the complete disconnect between corporate policies and daily reality. Her internal memo, which I discovered when she accidentally left it on the dining room table, revealed the systematic nature of her discrimination. Managing difficult charity residents was the subject line, and the content made my blood run cold. She instructed staff to limit time spent with sliding scale residents, to discourage excessive requests for assistance, and to remember that these residents should be grateful for the care they receive rather than expecting premium service. The memo specifically mentioned my name as an example of someone who requires firm boundaries and consistent reminders of her financial status. Patricia's favorite tactic was public humiliation disguised as administrative necessity. During her weekly tours with potential new residents and their families, she would make a point of stopping by my table in the dining room. "This is Eleanor," she would say with saccharine sweetness, "one of our residents who receives care through our charitable assistance program. We're so proud to be able to help people like Eleanor who otherwise couldn't afford quality senior care." The prospective families would smile politely while I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. Patricia knew exactly what she was doing, using me as a prop to demonstrate their facility's benevolence while simultaneously marking me as different, lesser. Charity. The message to paying families was clear. This won't be your experience because you can afford better treatment. Her treatment of other low-income residents was equally calculated. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose English was limited and whose son could only visit monthly, became Patricia's target for budget-related harassment. "We need to discuss your mother's laundry costs," Patricia would announce loudly in the common area, forcing Mrs. Rodriguez to endure public conversations about her financial limitations, while other residents pretended not to listen. The most cruel example involved Mr. Thompson, a veteran whose pension barely covered his care costs. When his daughter couldn't afford the facility's premium cable package, Patricia made sure he knew that his basic cable selection was all we can provide. "For residents in your situation," she would make these announcements during social hours when maximum residents were present. Ensuring his financial status became common knowledge. Patricia's office visits were exercises in psychological manipulation. She would summon sliding scale residents for care plan reviews that were actually lectures about gratitude and expectations. Eleanor, I want to make sure you understand how fortunate you are, she'd begin, settling behind her desk like a judge preparing to render verdict. Many facilities wouldn't accept residents with your financial profile. We do this as a service to the community, but it requires cooperation and appreciation from residents like you. These sessions always included reminders about the cost differential. Your daily care costs the facility $180, but you're paying only $85. That means other residents and their families are essentially subsidizing your care. I hope you keep that in mind when you're considering requests or complaints. The numbers were designed to make me feel like a burden, a deficit that generous paying families were covering out of kindness. She had perfected the art of plausible deniability. Every cruel act was wrapped in administrative justification or concern for fiscal responsibility. When she denied requests for minor room improvements or personal accommodations, it was never explicitly about money. It was about policy consistency or fairness to all residents. But the wealthy residents somehow received exceptions to those same policies regularly. The breaking point came when Patricia orchestrated a particularly humiliating incident involving my laundry. She announced during a staff meeting with residents that certain residents were using excessive laundry services, and that sliding scale residents needed to be more mindful of costs. She had calculated that my weekly laundry exceeded the average by 2 loads, and suggested I might need to manage my clothing changes more efficiently. The public shaming was devastating, but the implicit message was worse. Patricia was establishing that even basic dignity, clean clothes, fresh bedding was a privilege that charity cases like me needed to earn through gratitude and compliance. She was systematically teaching staff and residents that some people deserved less, simply because they could pay less. Standing in that meeting, feeling every eye in the room on me, while Patricia smiled her administrative smile, I made the decision that would change everything. The time for observation was over. The time for justice had begun. My fellow charity cases became the family I hadn't expected to find. In our shared experience of diminished dignity, we formed bonds that the paying residents never seemed to develop. We understood each other's struggles in ways that transcended words, and their stories broke my heart while strengthening my resolve. Mrs. Chen had been a mathematics professor before her husband's medical bills consumed their savings. At 83, she retained sharp intelligence and gentle wisdom, but staff treated her like a child because her English carried a slight accent, and her questions about medications annoyed them. She would sit in the dim back corner of the dining room, working crossword puzzles and pretending not to notice when aide Jennifer rolled her eyes at her requests for assistance. I know I am burdened, she told me one evening as we sat together in the understaffed common area, but I cannot help needing help. Her resignation broke my heart because I recognized the self-blame that institutional cruelty creates. She wasn't a burden, she was a brilliant woman whose life circumstances had placed her at the mercy of people who saw her as a problem to manage rather than a person to serve. Garcia had owned a small restaurant before arthritis made cooking impossible, and mounting health care costs forced him to sell. His children lived across the country, working jobs that didn't allow frequent visits, and Patricia made sure he felt abandoned. Some families really prioritize their elderly parents, she would say pointedly during his infrequent phone calls, speaking loudly enough for other residents to hear the implied criticism. He spent most days sitting by the window in the common area, watching the parking lot hopefully, even though he knew no one was coming. When I asked about his restaurant, his face would light up as he described the recipes he'd perfected and the regular customers, who became friends. I made people happy with food, he said wistfully. Now I cannot even choose what I eat for dinner. Mrs. Williams had been a nurse for 40 years before dementia began stealing her memories. Her condition fluctuated, leaving her lucid enough to understand her situation, but confused enough to be dismissed. When she tried to advocate for herself or others, she would approach staff with legitimate concerns: a resident in distress, a safety hazard, medication errors, but they would pat her hand condescendingly and say, "That's nice, dear. Why don't you go rest now?" The cruelest part was watching her professional instincts clash with her vulnerability. She knew what good care looked like because she had provided it for decades, but she couldn't command the respect necessary to ensure others received it. "They treat me like I'm stupid," she confided during one of her clearer moments. "But I know what I see. I know when people are suffering." Patricia's resident files revealed the systematic devaluation of everyone who couldn't pay full price. Our medical concerns were noted as complaints rather than symptoms. Our requests for assistance were labeled attention-seeking behavior. Our legitimate grievances were dismissed as adjustment difficulties or unrealistic expectations. The files created a paper trail that justified poor treatment by reframing normal needs as character flaws. The wealthy residents existed in a different reality within the same building. Mrs. Henderson received physical therapy sessions that lasted the full scheduled time and focused on her specific goals. Mrs. Chen received abbreviated sessions that felt perfunctory and ended early. If the therapist had other demands, Mrs. Henderson's family conferences involved detailed discussions of care plans and progress. Our families, when they could attend, received brief status updates that discouraged questions or concerns. The social dynamics reflected these institutional hierarchies. Paying residents formed friendships over bridge games and book clubs that required financial participation. We bonded over shared experiences of dismissal and strategies for surviving institutional indifference. They discussed their children's careers and grandchildren's achievements. We talked about how to get staff attention when we needed help and which aides were most likely to treat us kindly. The saddest realization was how quickly we internalized the system's message about our worth. I watched strong, accomplished people become apologetic for existing, grateful for basic human dignity, hesitant to ask for help they needed and deserved. The institutional culture systematically eroded self-advocacy until many residents accepted poor treatment as appropriate for their circumstances. But we also developed subtle forms of resistance and mutual support. Mrs. Chen would help others with paperwork they couldn't manage alone. Mr. Garcia shared snacks his daughter sent, creating small celebrations that staff couldn't control. Mrs. Williams used her nursing knowledge to help residents understand their conditions and medications. When staff provided inadequate explanations, our informal network became a shadow system of care and advocacy that filled gaps the institution created. We looked out for each other, shared information about which staff members were trustworthy, and provided the emotional support that the facility's programming ignored. In our marginalization, we found each other. These were the people I was really fighting for, not just myself, but every vulnerable person who deserved dignity regardless of their ability to pay for it. David Chen arrived at Sunset Manor on a Tuesday morning in April, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the same worried expression he'd maintained for 3 years of this elaborate deception. To staff and residents, he appeared to be just another lawyer conducting routine business with Patricia. Only I knew he was here to begin the process that would change everything. We met in the small conference room near Patricia's office, the same room where she conducted her humiliating care plan reviews with sliding scale residents. David spread documents across the table with practiced efficiency. But I could see the tension in his shoulders. Eleanor, are you absolutely certain about this? Once we begin, there's no going back to anonymity. I thought about Mrs. Chen sitting alone at dinner because staff didn't have time to help her cut her meat. I remembered Mr. Garcia waiting 40 minutes for assistance to the bathroom because Jennifer was busy chatting with Mrs. Henderson about her granddaughter's wedding. I considered Mrs. Williams trying to alert staff to another resident's distress and being dismissed as confused. I've never been more certain of anything, I told him. The question is whether the legal framework is in place to protect the changes I want to make. David opened the first folder and showed me the corporate resolution documents that would restore my active control over Whitmore Senior Living. For 3 years, the company had operated under the management structure established after Robert's death, with professional administrators running daily operations while I remained a passive owner. These papers would change that immediately. The board will need to vote, but your controlling interest makes the outcome certain, he explained. More importantly, we've documented the policy violations and discriminatory practices you've observed. That gives you legal justification for immediate personnel changes and operational reforms. The power of attorney documents were equally important. They established my right to make binding decisions about facility management, staffing, and resident care policies. No longer would I need to work through intermediaries or worry about administrative resistance to changes. My word would be law, backed by both legal authority and majority ownership. David had also prepared termination letters for Patricia and 3 staff members whose treatment of residents violated both company policies and basic human decency. The documentation was thorough, specific incidents, witness statements where possible, and clear policy violations that justified immediate dismissal. We're not relying on your undercover observations alone, he assured me. We've corroborated problems through resident complaint files, state inspection reports, and employee records. The employee performance reviews I had requested painted a disturbing picture of systematic neglect. Patricia's annual evaluations consistently rated her performance as exceeds expectations, while Ray resident satisfaction scores for her facility ranked lowest in our chain. The disconnect revealed either administrative incompetence or deliberate indifference to resident welfare. More damning were the incident reports that had been filed but never acted upon. Families had complained about delayed responses to call buttons, inadequate assistance with basic needs, and discriminatory treatment based on payment status. Patricia had dismissed these complaints as isolated incidents or misunderstandings, but the pattern was clear when viewed comprehensively. The legal exposure is significant, David warned. If families of mistreated residents decide to pursue litigation, the documented discrimination could result in substantial damages. You need to be prepared for that possibility when you make changes. But I wasn't worried about lawsuits from residents' families. I was worried about the residents themselves, the people who had suffered in silence because they believed they deserved poor treatment, who had internalized institutional cruelty as appropriate for their circumstances, who had lost hope that advocacy was possible or worthwhile. The new policy manual David had prepared would transform operations immediately. Every resident would receive identical care, regardless of payment source. Staff training would emphasize dignity and respect as non-negotiable values. Administrative practices that created artificial hierarchies would be eliminated. The changes would be comprehensive, immediate, and irreversible. What about the staff who haven't been part of the problem? I asked. Jennifer and the others who've been cruel, they need to go. But there are good people here who've been working within a bad system. David smiled for the first time during our meeting. That's exactly why this will work. The good Employees, the ones who've been frustrated by policies they couldn't change, will embrace these reforms. We're not destroying a workplace, we're liberating it. The timeline was aggressive, but necessary. Within 48 hours, I would reveal my identity to Patricia and assert control over facility operations. Within a week, new policies would be implemented and problematic staff would be replaced. Within a month, every resident would experience the dignity and respect that should have been their right from the beginning. Are you ready for this to be over? David asked as he packed the documents back into his briefcase. 3 years is a long time to live as someone you're not. I thought about the woman I'd been before grief and deception changed me confident, decisive, unafraid of confrontation. That woman was still here, just temporarily hidden beneath the protective coloring of vulnerability. Tomorrow, she would emerge to reclaim what was rightfully hers and to ensure that no one else would suffer. As I had suffered, I'm ready, I told him. It's time for Patricia to learn who she's been dismissing all these years. That evening, I sat in my small room surrounded by 3 years of carefully documented evidence. My hidden journal lay open beside employee performance reviews David had obtained, state inspection reports that revealed patterns of neglect, and resident complaint files that Patricia had dismissed or buried. The scope of institutional failure was overwhelming, but so was my determination to fix it. The employee performance documentation painted a picture of systematic discrimination, disguised as professional assessment. Jennifer, the aide who treated sliding scale residents with such casual cruelty, had received glowing reviews from Patricia despite multiple resident complaints about her attitude and delayed response times. Her file contained notes praising her efficiency and ability to manage difficult residents, code words for the dismissive treatment I had experienced firsthand. By contrast, Maria Santos, an aide who consistently treated all residents with genuine kindness, had received mediocre evaluations that criticized her for spending excessive time with individual residents and encouraging unrealistic expectations. Her crime was treating people like human beings rather than tasks to be completed efficiently. Tomorrow, Maria would be promoted, while Jennifer would be terminated. The state inspection reports revealed how Patricia had manipulated compliance reviews to hide discriminatory practices. During announced inspections, sliding scale residents were temporarily moved to better rooms, given extra attention, and coached to express satisfaction with their care. The performance was convincing enough to maintain the facility's licensing and accreditation, but it was pure theater, designed to conceal ongoing neglect. More troubling were the unannounced inspection findings that Patricia had successfully challenged or minimized: citations for inadequate staffing in certain areas, delayed response to resident needs, and maintenance issues that disproportionately affected lower-income residents had been explained away as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. Patricia's ability to deflect accountability had allowed problems to persist and multiply. The financial records David had compiled showed how discrimination translated into cost savings that boosted Patricia's performance bonuses, reduced staffing in areas housing sliding scale residents, delayed maintenance in common areas we used, and elimination of services that primarily benefited lower-income residents, had all contributed to improved profit margins that Patricia claimed as evidence of effective management. I spent hours reviewing the new policy manual that would transform operations immediately. Every section had been carefully crafted to eliminate the ambiguities that had allowed discrimination to flourish. Staff-to-resident ratios would be identical regardless of payment source. Response time standards would apply equally to all residents. Administrative practices would be transparent and consistent. The staff training program I had designed would begin within days of my revelation. Every employee would attend sessions on dignity, respect, and resident rights. They would learn to recognize and report discriminatory practices. Most importantly, they would understand that their employment depended on treating every resident with equal care and compassion. My emotional preparation was equally important. For 3 years, I had absorbed daily humiliations and systematic devaluation of my worth. I had internalized the institution's message that I should be grateful for basic human dignity, rather than expecting it as a right. Tomorrow, I would need to shed that conditioning and reclaim the authority I had voluntarily surrendered. The transformation would be psychological as much as administrative. Eleanor, the charity case, would disappear, replaced by Eleanor Whitmore, the woman who had built this company on principles of respect and excellence. That woman was decisive, uncompromising about standards, and unafraid of difficult conversations with people who had betrayed her trust. I practiced the conversation I would have with Patricia, imagining her shock and panic when she realized the scope of her mistake. For 3 years, she had treated the owner of her company like a burden to be managed, rather than a person to be served. Tomorrow, she would learn the cost of that choice. The termination letters were signed and ready. Jennifer would be dismissed for consistently providing substandard care and displaying discriminatory attitudes toward residents based on their financial status. 2 other aides would be terminated for similar reasons. Their replacements had already been identified from other facilities in our chain, employees who understood and embodied the values we expected. But this wasn't simply about punishment or revenge. The real goal was transformation, creating an environment where every resident received excellent care regardless of their ability to pay, where staff took pride in their work because they were supported and respected, where families could trust that their loved ones were safe and valued. As I prepared for sleep, I felt a mixture of anticipation and sadness. Tomorrow would end my exile from power and purpose, but it would also end the unexpected friendships I had formed with Mrs. Chen, Mr. Garcia, and Mrs. Williams. They would always know me as Eleanor, the charity case, before they learned about Eleanor, the owner, and that shared experience of vulnerability would remain precious to me. I woke before dawn on Wednesday morning, feeling more alert and purposeful than I had in 3 years. Today, Eleanor, the charity case, would disappear forever, and Eleanor Whitmore would reclaim her company and her mission. I dressed carefully in the one good outfit I had kept hidden in my closet, a navy blue suit that reminded me of the confident woman I had been before grief changed everything. Patricia was in her office by 8 o'clock, as always, reviewing reports and preparing for her morning facility tour. I knocked on her door with the corporate charter documents in my hand, my heart beating steadily with anticipation rather than anxiety. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself. Eleanor. Patricia looked up from her desk with that familiar expression of barely concealed irritation. Is there something you need? I'm quite busy this morning. Yes, I said, stepping into her office and closing the door behind me. There's something very important I need to discuss with you. Please sit down. She remained standing, clearly annoyed by my presumption in giving her instructions. Eleanor, if this is about your laundry concerns again, I've already explained our policies regarding excessive service requests from sliding scale residents. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I interrupted, placing the corporate charter on her desk. And I own this facility. I own this entire company. I own every facility in our chain, including the building you're standing in and the job you're about to lose. The color drained from Patricia's face as she stared at the documents. Her eyes moved from the corporate charter to the property deeds to the ownership structure. that clearly identified me as majority shareholder and controlling partner of Whitmore Senior Living. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly as she tried to process information that contradicted everything she thought she knew. "That's impossible," she whispered finally. "You're a charity case. Your file shows limited income, sliding scale assistance. My file shows exactly what I wanted it to show," I said calmly. "For 3 years, I've been living here as an ordinary resident to understand how you and your staff treat people who can't advocate for themselves. What I've discovered is that you systematically violated every principle this company was founded on." Patricia sank into her chair, her face pale and her hands shaking as she flipped through the legal documents that confirmed my identity and authority. "This can't be real. You're confused, Eleanor. These documents, someone must have given you false information." "Patricia," I said, using the tone of authority I hadn't employed in 3 years, "you will address me as Mrs. Whitmore, and you will listen carefully, because your career depends on understanding what happens next." I opened my journal and began reading specific incidents she had orchestrated or ignored. The public humiliation during family tours, the discriminatory seating arrangements in the dining room, the delayed responses to call buttons for sliding scale residents, the condescending lectures about gratitude and fiscal responsibility, the systematic devaluation of human beings based on their ability to pay. "Every word of this is documented," I continued. "Times, dates, witnesses, policy violations. You've created a culture of discrimination that betrays everything this company stands for. You've treated vulnerable people as burdens rather than human beings deserving of respect and dignity." Patricia's shock was giving way to panic as she realized the scope of her situation. "Mrs. Whitmore, if I had realized I would never have." "You would never have what?" I asked. "Treated people with basic human decency, followed the company policies you were hired to implement. Remember that residents are people, not profit centers." She fumbled through her desk drawer and pulled out my resident file, staring at the false financial information that had justified 3 years of poor treatment. "The documentation showed you were indigent. I was following standard protocols for managing charitable admissions. There are no standard protocols for discrimination," I said firmly. "There are company policies that require identical treatment for all residents regardless of payment source. Policies you systematically ignored or violated. Policies that exist to prevent exactly the kind of institutional cruelty I've experienced." The phone on her desk rang, but Patricia ignored it, still staring at the documents that proved her career was over. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "How can I fix this?" "You can't," I replied. "Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building within the hour. You will receive final pay according to your contract, but your access to this facility ends today." Patricia's face crumpled as the reality hit her. 3 years of accumulated cruelty, of casual dismissal of human dignity, of treating vulnerable people as less worthy of respect. It was all coming due at once, and the price was everything she had worked to build in her administrative career. Within 2 hours, Sunset Manor transformed from Patricia's domain into mine. Security arrived to escort her from the building, as staff watched in stunned silence, whispering among themselves about the impossible revelation that their charity case resident was actually their owner. I felt no satisfaction in Patricia's humiliation, only relief that her reign of institutional cruelty was finally over. Jennifer received her termination letter in the break room, surrounded by co-workers who had witnessed 3 years of her dismissive treatment toward sliding scale residents. Her face flushed red as she read the detailed documentation of discriminatory behavior and policy violations. "This is ridiculous," she protested. I was just following Patricia's directions about managing difficult residents. There are no difficult residents, I told her calmly. There are only employees who choose to treat people with dignity, or those who choose to dehumanize them. You consistently chose dehumanization, and now you're choosing to blame others rather than accepting responsibility for your actions. The other terminated employees, Mark from maintenance, who had deliberately delayed repairs in sliding scale residence rooms, and Sandra from dining services, who had served cold meals to residents. She considered complaints left quietly after security explained their legal obligations regarding facility property and resident confidentiality. I called an immediate staff meeting in the main dining room, the same space where Patricia had conducted her weekly humiliation tours and where I had been relegated to back corner tables for 3 years. Every employee gathered aides, nurses, kitchen staff, housekeeping, therapy assistants, their faces showing confusion, concern, and curiosity about what would happen next. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I began, standing at the front of the room where Patricia used to hold court. For 3 years, I've been living here as a resident to understand how this facility operates from the inside. What I discovered is that some of you have forgotten that your job is to serve people, not manage problems. Maria Santos, the aide, who had consistently treated all residents with kindness despite Patricia's criticism, looked shocked, but not entirely surprised. She had always seemed to understand that basic human decency didn't depend on administrative approval or resident payment status. Her face showed relief rather than panic as she realized the changes ahead. Patricia Morrison has been terminated for systematic discrimination against residents based on their financial status. I continued. 3 other employees have been dismissed for similar violations of company policy and basic human dignity. Their behavior was unacceptable, and it ends today. I explained the new policies that would govern operations immediately. Equal treatment for all residents regardless of payment source. Identical response times to call buttons and requests for assistance. Fair distribution of room assignments without regard to financial considerations. Respect and dignity as non-negotiable expectations rather than optional courtesies. For those of you who have been providing excellent care, despite administrative pressure to treat residents differently, this is your opportunity to flourish, I said, looking directly at Maria and several other staff members whose kindness I had observed. Maria Santos will be promoted to head aide, effective immediately. Her approach to resident care represents exactly what we expect from every employee. The salary adjustments I announced were substantial. Every employee would receive immediate raises based on industry standards for facilities committed to excellence, rather than cost-cutting. The message was clear: quality care would be supported and rewarded, not discouraged as an expensive luxury. Training programs would begin within the week, focusing on dignity, respect, and resident rights. Every employee would attend sessions on recognizing and preventing discriminatory practices. They would learn to see residents as individuals with unique needs and preferences, rather than tasks to be completed efficiently. Some of you may be wondering why I chose to experience this facility as a vulnerable resident, rather than revealing my identity immediately. I said, the answer is simple: you can't manage what you don't understand. I needed to understand how residents are treated when they can't advocate for themselves, when they depend entirely on your professionalism and compassion. I shared specific examples of excellent care I had witnessed Maria helping Mrs. Chan with patience and respect. Carlos from housekeeping always greeting residents by name and asking about their comfort. Nurse Rachel taking time to explain medications and answer questions thoroughly. These employees had maintained dignity and excellence. Despite administrative pressure to provide minimal service, the changes would extend beyond individual behavior to systemic improvements. Staffing levels would increase to ensure adequate coverage for all residents. Maintenance issues would be addressed promptly regardless of room location or resident payment status. Activities programs would be inclusive and accessible to everyone. This facility will become a model for our entire chain. I concluded, excellence in senior care isn't just possible, it's our obligation to every person who trusts us with their most vulnerable years. Anyone who can't commit to that standard should look for employment elsewhere. As the meeting ended, I saw hope in the faces of employees who had been frustrated by policies they couldn't change. Relief in those who had maintained excellence despite administrative indifference, and determination in everyone who understood that real transformation was beginning. For the first time in 3 years, Sunset Manor felt like the place Robert and I had envisioned when we built our company a home, where aging was met with dignity rather than dismissal. The new policy manual I distributed to every employee was more than documentation, it was a declaration of values that would transform daily operations immediately. Every page emphasized that excellent care wasn't dependent on payment status, family involvement, or administrative convenience. Quality was non-negotiable. Dignity was universal, and respect was every resident's right. Staffing changes began within days. I promoted 3 employees who had consistently demonstrated compassion. Despite Patricia's discouragement, Maria Santos to head aide, Carlos Martinez to facilities supervisor, and Rachel Thompson to assistant nursing director. Their promotions sent a clear message that kindness and excellence would be rewarded, rather than criticized as inefficient. The new employees I brought in from other facilities in our chain had been specifically selected for their commitment to dignified care. They arrived with enthusiasm for the comprehensive approach we were implementing, and stories of frustration at facilities where cost-cutting had compromised resident welfare. Finally, they would work somewhere that supported their professional values. Training sessions began immediately, focusing on resident rights, dignity preservation, and recognizing discriminatory practices. Every employee attended workshops on understanding the senior experience from the resident's perspective, what it felt like to depend on others for basic needs, to have privacy invaded by necessity, to fear being forgotten or dismissed. Imagine you're 85 years old and your children live across the country. I told the training groups, you need help with basic functions you've performed independently for 8 decades. How do you want staff to speak to you? How do you want your requests for assistance to be received? How do you want to be treated when you're having a difficult day? The physical environment required immediate attention as well. The leaky ceiling in our common area was repaired within 24 hours. Burned out light bulbs that had left our hallway dim for months were replaced. The broken bathroom door that had posed safety risks was fixed and upgraded. These weren't major renovations, but they demonstrated that every resident's comfort mattered equally. Dining room seating was reorganized to eliminate the informal segregation that had relegated sliding scale residents to back corner tables. Room assignments were reviewed and adjusted to ensure fair distribution of desirable accommodations, regardless of payment source. The message was clear: location, quality, and access wouldn't depend on financial status. The activities program expanded dramatically. Craft supplies were provided by the facility rather than requiring personal payments. That excluded lower-income residents. Transportation for day trips was covered through general operating funds. Movie nights featured films available to everyone, rather than premium cable selections that created artificial barriers to participation. Most importantly, I established regular resident feedback sessions where concerns could be raised without fear of retaliation. For too long, residents had internalized the message that gratitude should replace advocacy, that complaints were inappropriate for people receiving assistance. The new culture encouraged residents to express needs, preferences, and concerns as active participants in their care. Mrs. Chen's transformation was remarkable. Within a week of the changes, she was participating in activities she had avoided for months, asking questions about her medications without apology, and requesting assistance with confidence rather than hesitant shame. "I feel like person again," she told me during one of our evening conversations. "Not burden, not charity case, just person who matters." Mr. Garcia experienced similar renewal. Staff now responded promptly to his call button, engaged him in genuine conversations about his restaurant background, and incorporated his dietary preferences into meal planning. His depression lifted as he realized his history and knowledge were valued rather than ignored. Mrs. Williams used her nursing expertise to help design better care protocols for residents with cognitive challenges rather than being dismissed as confused. Her professional insights were respected and implemented. She began leading informal education sessions where she shared knowledge about health conditions and self-advocacy with other residents. The financial impact was positive despite increased costs for staffing and services. Occupancy rates rose as word spread about the facility's transformation. Families who had been considering relocating their loved ones decided to stay. New admissions increased as our reputation for excellent care, regardless of payment ability, attracted residents who valued dignity over luxury. Employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements. Staff members who had been frustrated by discriminatory policies now felt proud of their workplace. Turnover decreased significantly as employees found professional fulfillment in providing excellent care without artificial restrictions based on resident payment status. The state inspection results reflected the comprehensive changes. Citations for inadequate response times, maintenance delays, and staffing shortages disappeared. The facility received commendations for innovative programs that supported resident dignity and inclusive activities that built community regardless of economic differences. Within a month, Sunset Manor had become the model I was implementing across our entire chain. A place where aging was met with respect, where financial circumstances didn't determine quality of care, and where every resident could live with dignity during their most vulnerable years. The letters began arriving. Within weeks, handwritten notes from residents' families expressing gratitude for changes they could see and feel during visits. Mrs. Henderson's daughter, who had always received excellent treatment for her mother, wrote about the improved atmosphere and staff morale that made every visit more pleasant. But the most meaningful letters came from families of residents who had been marginalized. Mr. Garcia's son called from California, crying as he described his father's renewed enthusiasm during their weekly phone conversations. "He's talking about teaching the kitchen staff his enchilada recipe," he said. "I haven't heard him sound this happy since before Mom died." What happened there? It's like he found himself again. These transformations weren't just policy changes, they were resurrections of human dignity that had been systematically suppressed. Watching residents reclaim their sense of worth and purpose filled me with satisfaction that transcended any business success I had achieved in decades of entrepreneurship. Maria Santos had embraced her promotion with enthusiasm that inspired everyone around her. She implemented a buddy system that paired new residents with established ones to ease transitions and build community. Her leadership style emphasized collaboration and support rather than hierarchy and control, creating an environment where staff felt empowered to advocate for residents. Mrs. Whitmore, she told me during one of our weekly check-ins, I always wanted to provide this kind of care, but the old policies made it impossible. Now I can actually help people the way they deserve. It makes all the difference in how I feel about my work. The culture shift was visible in countless small interactions. Staff members now smile genuinely when entering residence rooms, rather than displaying the dutiful expressions of people completing unpleasant tasks. Conversations were longer and more personal because employees had time and permission to connect with residents as individuals, rather than rushing through standardized care routines. Carlos had transformed the maintenance department's approach to resident requests. Instead of delayed responses based on room location or payment status, every repair was handled promptly, with attention to how the problem affected the residents' daily comfort. He began asking residents about their preferences for timing and approach, treating their spaces as homes rather than institutional property. Rachel's nursing staff implemented comprehensive medication education sessions where residents learned about their prescriptions, potential side effects, and the reasons for treatment plans. No longer did residents receive pills with minimal explanation or feel embarrassed about asking questions. Knowledge became empowerment rather than a privilege reserved for those with advocating families. The resident councils I established gave everyone a voice in facility operations. Monthly meetings allowed residents to suggest improvements, raise concerns, and participate in decisions that affected their daily lives. The councils weren't token gestures, they had real influence over policies, activities, and environmental changes. Mrs. Chen was elected to chair the first council, her mathematical background and gentle wisdom making her a natural leader. Under her guidance, residents proposed and implemented improvements that administration had never considered. Quiet areas for phone calls, adjustable lighting in common spaces, and garden plots where residents could grow flowers or vegetables. The gardening project became particularly meaningful for residents who missed having control over their environment. Mrs. Williams used her knowledge of medicinal plants to create an herb garden that supplied the kitchen with fresh seasonings. Mr. Garcia grew tomatoes and peppers that reminded him of ingredients he had used in his restaurant. The gardens represented autonomy and contribution rather than passive consumption of services. Staff training evolved beyond formal sessions to ongoing mentorship that emphasized personal growth alongside professional development. I shared stories from my 3 years as a resident, helping employees understand how their actions affected people's daily emotional well-being. The training wasn't punitive, it was enlightening, helping dedicated people become even more effective advocates for resident welfare. The success at Sunset Manor became a model for transformation across our entire chain. I visited other facilities with teams of our newly trained staff, sharing strategies and approaches that prioritize dignity while maintaining financial sustainability. The changes weren't expensive, they were simply intentional, focusing resources on what mattered most to resident experience. Employee retention improved dramatically as staff members found professional fulfillment in work that aligned with their values. The culture attracted high-quality candidates who wanted careers in senior care, rather than just jobs that paid bills. Excellence became self-reinforcing as dedicated employees inspired each other to continuous improvement. Most importantly, I had rediscovered my own sense of purpose after 3 years of feeling invisible and powerless. The business success was gratifying, but the human impact was transformative. Every resident who felt valued, every family member who trusted us with their loved one's care, every employee who took pride in their work, these were the real measures of what we had accomplished together. The architectural plans spread across my office desk represented more than facility improvements. They embodied a vision of senior care that prioritize human dignity alongside medical necessity. Private spaces for meaningful conversations with family, gardens designed for accessibility and therapeutic benefit. Common areas that encouraged community while respecting individual preferences for solitude or engagement. David Chen reviewed the expansion plans with the same meticulous attention he had brought to my legal restoration. The board approved the full budget, he reported. $15 million for improvements across 12 facilities, with Sunset Manor as the flagship demonstration of what's possible when you invest in dignity rather than just compliance. The foundation I was establishing would ensure these values outlasted my personal involvement. The Eleanor and Robert Whitmore Foundation for Dignified Aging would provide grants to facilities nationwide that demonstrated commitment to treating seniors with respect, regardless of their financial circumstances. The endowment would also fund research into innovative approaches to senior care that preserved autonomy while providing necessary support. I want every dollar to serve people who might otherwise be forgotten. I explained to the Foundation's organizing committee, residents without family advocates, facilities in underserved communities, programs that help seniors age with dignity, whether they're in institutions or living independently. Money should remove barriers to respect, not create them. My decision to remain at Sunset Manor as both owner and resident surprised many people, but it felt natural to me. This had become my home during 3 years of exile, and now it was becoming the home I had always envisioned for seniors who needed support without surrendering their humanity. Why would I leave just when the real work was beginning? The transformation extended beyond policies to physical spaces that supported dignity, private alcoves where residents could have difficult conversations with family members, kitchenettes where those who enjoyed cooking could prepare special meals or treats to share, workshop spaces where residents could pursue hobbies and crafts that gave them purpose beyond consuming services. Mrs. Chen's mathematics background made her invaluable in designing therapeutic programs that challenged residents intellectually while accommodating various physical limitations. Her tutoring sessions helped residents with cognitive challenges maintain mental acuity through structured but enjoyable exercises. Her gentle approach encouraged participation without creating pressure or embarrassment. Mr. Garcia's culinary expertise led to cooking classes that brought together residents, staff, and family members around shared meals and cultural traditions. The industrial kitchen was supplemented with smaller, residential-style cooking areas where residents could prepare foods that connected them to their heritage and personal history. Mrs. Williams developed health education programs that helped residents understand their conditions and treatment options without feeling overwhelmed or patronized. Her nursing background allowed her to translate medical information into accessible language, while encouraging residents to advocate for themselves with physicians and care teams. The employment program I initiated gave residents opportunities to contribute their professional knowledge through consulting, mentoring, or part-time work that accommodated their physical limitations. Retirement didn't have to mean irrelevance, and many residents discovered renewed purpose in sharing decades of accumulated wisdom with younger generations. The scholarship fund provided assistance to families who wanted quality care for aging relatives but couldn't afford premium pricing. The goal wasn't charity in the traditional sense, it was ensuring that financial circumstances didn't determine access to dignity, respect, and excellent care during vulnerable years. Sunset Manor became a destination for senior care professionals studying innovative approaches to institutional culture. Our staff presented at conferences about dignity-centered care models that improved resident satisfaction while maintaining financial sustainability. The success demonstrated that excellence wasn't expensive, it was intentional. The ripple effects extended throughout our industry as families began demanding higher standards from facilities that had previously operated with minimal oversight. Competitors were forced to improve their own practices as residents and families learned that respectful, dignified care was achievable rather than idealistic. My relationship with the business evolved from ownership to stewardship. The company would continue long after I was gone, guided by principles that prioritize human dignity alongside financial sustainability. The policies, training programs, and cultural standards we developed would protect future generations of seniors from the discrimination and neglect I had experienced firsthand. The woman who had entered Sunset Manor as a charity case was gone, forever, replaced by someone who understood vulnerability from the inside while retaining the power to transform systems that failed vulnerable people. It was the most important education of my life and the most meaningful application of everything I had learned about business, leadership, and human dignity. 6 months after revealing my identity, I sit in the same room where I once felt invisible and dismissed, but everything has changed. The updated will and testament David helped me prepare ensures that Whitmore Senior Living will continue its mission long after I'm gone, governed by principles that prioritize human dignity above profit margins and respect above convenience. The legal documents establish permanent protections against the discrimination I experienced. No future administrator can implement policies that treat residents differently based on payment status. Staff training on dignity and respect becomes mandatory and ongoing. Resident advocacy systems must be maintained and strengthened. The Foundation's oversight ensures these standards will be monitored and enforced indefinitely. My 3-year journey from powerful owner to powerless resident taught me lessons that decades of business success had not. I learned what it felt like to be dismissed, to have my worth measured by my financial circumstances, to depend on the kindness of strangers who saw me as a burden rather than a person. That education was painful, but invaluable. You cannot protect people from experiences you have never had. The friendships I formed during those years of exile remain precious to me. Mrs. Chen and I still work together on resident council initiatives, but now our relationship includes the shared memory of being marginalized together. Mr. Garcia teaches cooking classes with enthusiasm. That reminds me why I fell in love with senior care. In the first place, the opportunity to help people maintain purpose and joy during challenging transitions. Mrs. Williams has become my closest advisor on policy development. Her nursing background, combined with her experience as a dismissed resident, giving her unique insights into what dignity-centered care requires. Her transformation from forgotten patient to respected consultant embodies everything I hope to achieve through this long, difficult process. The staff who embraced our new culture have flourished in ways that remind me why Robert and I entered this business originally. Maria Santos now oversees staff development across our entire chain. Her natural compassion and leadership skills inspiring a new generation of caregivers who see their work as a calling rather than just employment. The business metrics tell a story of transformation that validates everything we invested in: dignity and respect. Occupancy rates at Sunset Manor reached 98% and remained steady as families chose our facilities specifically because of our reputation for excellent care, regardless of payment ability. Staff turnover dropped to less than 5% annually as employees found professional fulfillment in work that aligned with their values. More importantly, the human impact extends far beyond financial measures. Families write letters describing how their loved ones' personalities returned after years of institutional suppression. Residents who had given up hope for meaningful Connection rediscovered joy in daily interactions with staff who saw them as individuals rather than tasks to complete. The model we developed at Sunset Manor has been implemented across all 23 facilities in our chain. State inspection results show consistent excellence in resident care and satisfaction. Industry recognition has positioned our company as a leader in dignity-centered senior care, influencing practices at facilities far beyond our direct control. The Foundation's grant program has supported innovative senior care initiatives in 30 states, funding programs that prioritize resident autonomy, cultural sensitivity, and family involvement. The research we sponsor investigates approaches to aging that preserve dignity while addressing medical needs, contributing to broader understanding of what excellent senior care requires. But the most significant change is personal. The woman who felt forgotten and powerless during 3 years of systematic discrimination has been replaced by someone who understands vulnerability without surrendering strength. I know what it feels like to be dismissed and devalued, but I also know the power of advocacy, community, and persistent hope for justice. Robert would be proud of what we accomplished together, even though he wasn't here to see the final transformation. The company we built survived the test of his absence and my temporary withdrawal, emerging stronger and more committed to its founding principles. The legacy we created together will protect thousands of seniors from the discrimination and neglect that once seemed acceptable. My decision to experience senior care from the inside was risky, painful, and transformative. It cost me 3 years of comfort and dignity, but it gave me knowledge that changed everything about how we approach aging and vulnerability. The charity case, who endured daily humiliation, became the advocate who transformed an industry. As I look toward my own future aging in a facility I now trust completely, surrounded by staff who understand that respect is every resident's right, I feel peace about the journey that brought me here. The woman who built a business empire discovered that her greatest achievement was learning how to protect the dignity of people who could no longer protect themselves. The reckoning I promised on that first day has become something larger than justice for past wrongs. It has become a foundation for future hope, ensuring that aging can be met with grace rather than shame, support rather than dismissal, dignity rather than charity. Every resident who feels valued, every family who trusts their loved one's care, every employee who takes pride in their compassion, these are the true measures of what we accomplished together. The charity case is gone forever, but the lessons she learned will protect vulnerable people for generations to come.